The Nevada desert sun poured down on the Ruby Mountains like fire, tearing the sky apart with waves of shimmering heat above the cracked earth. In a place where life and death are separated by a single gust of wind, a fragile creature was fighting, in silence, in the middle of a parched valley, lying deep in a dry creek bed that hadn't seen water for many seasons. A young wild horse had collapsed. Its once glossy chestnut coat was now dusty and sun-scorched. Its long, awkward legs trembled weakly, no longer strong enough to lift its gaunt body. Each breath was a battle, short, sharp, and fading. Its name would later be Rayo, meaning lightning in Spanish, but in that moment, it was simply a lost, small life in the midst of unforgiving wilderness. A sudden storm 2 days earlier had scattered the herd. In the chaos, as hooves kicked up choking clouds of dust, Rayo, too small, too weak, had been left behind. At first, it kept walking, through scorched tufts of grass, over cracked stretches of dirt and stone, hoping to find familiar whinnies, recognizable hoofprints. But the desert shows no mercy. After 2 days without water, without shade, Rayo's young body could take no more. It collapsed onto the fractured earth, eyes wide open to the piercing blue sky above, where not even a bird passed by. Its ribs pushed visibly against its skin, heaving with each strained breath. Each inhale seemed to drain the last reserves of hope. Far away, unnoticed by anyone, a pair of amber eyes watched in silence. At the edge of a low rock ledge, beneath the shadow of an ancient cypress tree, Koda, an old gray wolf, lay crouched, observing every weak movement of the young horse. Koda was 12 years old, a near mythical age for a wild wolf surviving in such harsh conditions. Once the leader of a great pack, Koda now lived alone, pushed out by younger, stronger, more ruthless rivals. The scars along his muzzle and legs, a chipped fang, and his limping gait bore witness to battles long fought and lost. His stomach ached with hunger. His limbs throbbed. A dying foal was the perfect prey. From hundreds of paces away, Koda had smelled it, and now, he lay in wait, ready for that final moment, when Rayo's heart would stop beating. Then, the wind shifted. The scent of blood, of despair, and something else, vague, deep, slipped into Koda's breath. The old wolf slowly rose, each bone creaking with age. He took one step, and paused. His eyes met Rayo's, eyes that held no fury, no fear, only confusion, exhaustion, and a faint, fragile plea. A dying creature looking at what had once been death incarnate. And then, the first strange thing happened. Koda did not move forward. He stood still, wind threading through his gray fur, desert dust swirling around him. And the two beings, one young, one old, stood locked in a gaze, as if they had known each other once, in another lifetime. It was not the beginning of an attack. It was the beginning of an impossible connection. And from that moment on, the laws of survival in the desert began to change. The afternoon sunlight stretched long across the sharp stones and scorched grass of the Nevada Valley. In the dry creek bed, where life could now be measured only by the faintest of breaths, Rayo remained motionless, his gaunt body trembling with every strained inhale. His eyes were half closed, one eyelid fluttering as if fighting off the fog of unconsciousness creeping in. No more than 20 paces away, Koda, the old gray wolf, stood still as stone, his head tilted slightly, amber eyes fixed on the small creature before him, not with the gaze of a predator, but of one standing at the edge of instinct, where reason and something else, something close to compassion, wrestled within him. He could smell dried blood, slow decay, and the faint musk of fear radiating from Rayo's fragile frame. Scents that once served as familiar invitations to hunt, but today, they did not pull Koda forward. To the south, wind howled through narrow canyons, bringing with it a different signal. Coyotes, the opportunists of the desert, were approaching. They hunted by scent and wouldn't hesitate to scavenge from a kill they hadn't made. Koda knew that if they caught Rayo's scent, they would descend, without mercy, on a meal he hadn't yet touched. The old wolf growled low in his throat. Not a threat, a decision. He stepped toward Rayo, each movement soft as smoke. Rayo heard him. The young horse's weakened body shivered instinctively. His eyes cracked open, wide with terror. Helpless, Koda stopped just a half step away. He lowered his muzzle and sniffed Rayo's neck, where the weak pulse fluttered beneath skin stretched tight. Then, he did not bite, did not growl, did not strike. Instead, Koda turned away, trotting toward a nearby rock hollow, where a rare puddle of rainwater remained from the storm 2 days earlier. He lowered his head and drank, just a small sip, and then trotted back. Muzzle still wet. Returning to Rayo, Koda did the unimaginable. He licked the young Mustang's muzzle. Gently, deliberately, as if passing along the last drops of water from his own body to the creature on the edge of death. Rayo's eyes fluttered faintly. His dry, cracked tongue slipped out just a little, trying to taste the unexpected moisture on his lips. Koda turned away again, went back to the puddle, and repeated. Each time he returned, he licked Rayo's lips, his nose, his neck. No fangs, no claws, only warmth, water, and an irrational patience. Elsewhere, 10 miles away, a worn-out pickup truck roared over jagged backroads. Inside, Jessica Harmon, a 32-year-old wildlife biologist who tracked wild Mustangs in Nevada, gripped the steering wheel tight. "We might be too late," she whispered, eyes scanning the rugged terrain. "But we had to try," murmured Mark, her colleague, eyes locked on his binoculars. "If that foal's still alive, we'll bring it back." Neither of them knew that. Deep within the desert, an old wolf had just shattered an ancient boundary between predator and prey, choosing instead a path never charted in nature. To keep another being alive. As sunset washed over the Nevada Valley, painting the desert in brilliant shades of orange and violet, Rayo was still alive, a fact that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. His heartbeat remained faint, but the young wild horse's eyes were no longer dull. They blinked slowly, and each time they opened, they met the gaze of Koda, the old gray wolf lying silently beside him. Koda had stayed there, keeping Rayo warm with his own body. His thick silver fur, once matted with the dust of battles, now pressed gently against the trembling ribs of the young foal. That warmth didn't come from a herd. It didn't come from a mother. It came from the very creature who, by all natural law, should have torn into Rayo's throat at dusk. The night wind blew cold across the valley. In the distance, the savage howls of the coyotes echoed. Koda lifted his head and listened in silence. They were getting closer, each call, each footfall a clear signal of approaching danger. At the same time, Rayo shivered, his body instinctively reacting to the familiar sound, the voice of predators. With what little strength he had left, the foal raised his head a few inches, then collapsed back to the earth. Gasping for air, Koda stood up. No more hesitation, no more wavering between instinct and intuition. He looked back at Rayo one last time. And in that moment, it wasn't the gaze of a guardian. It was the stare of an old warrior receiving his final command. Then he moved, striding toward the horizon, where the coyote pack was closing in. At the same time, half a mile away, Jessica and Mark had abandoned their truck and were hiking through the dry creek bed, flashlights scanning every bush and rock. In the dim twilight, Mark stopped and pointed ahead. "Jessica, look, something's lying next to the foal." Jessica squinted. In the pale glow of the rising moon, she saw a shape of gray fur, gently licking Rayo's muzzle. "That's a wolf." "No. That can't be." Mark stammered. It's taking care of the horse?" They slowed their approach, stunned. As they drew closer, Koda rose to his feet, his aged legs trembling, but his amber eyes sharp as steel. He didn't flee. He stood between them and Rayo. Jessica stopped dead in her tracks, heart pounding. He's protecting him. They all stood still. Three beings, a human, a dying foal, and an old wolf, sharing a silence so thick it pressed against the desert air. In that moment, Koda, once a fierce pack leader, did more than abandon instinct. He extended trust to humans. And Jessica understood. They had stepped into a story unlike anything she had ever studied in textbooks. A solitary, irrational, yet profoundly pure choice in the wild. Jessica's flashlight beam swept across the shallow basin where Rayo lay. She and Mark stopped, just 10 steps from Koda. They were prepared for anything. A startled old wolf, a sudden attack, or a tragic scene. But none of that happened. Koda did not growl. He did not run. He simply stood there, between them and the dying foal. Like the last sentry of the desert night. Mark whispered, "Wolves don't do this." Jessica replied softly, almost a breath. "Koda does." She took a few steps back, slowly unzipping her field rescue backpack. From inside, she pulled out a foldable silicone bowl, the kind she used to hydrate wild animals during research expeditions. She poured clean water from her canteen into it, added a pinch of mineral salts. Then, with a calm breath, as if she were reasoning with a legend, she walked slowly toward Koda and gently placed the bowl a few steps away from him. When she stepped back, Koda didn't move, only when Mark turned off the flashlight, letting twilight's soft darkness take over. Did Koda step forward? He sniffed the bowl, then looked up at Jessica, and carefully took it in his jaws. Still dusted with time and blood. Without spilling a drop, he carried the bowl back to Rayo. Jessica held her breath. Mark murmured, "What the hell?" Koda set the bowl down by Rayo's muzzle. With a gentle nudge of his nose, he roused the fragile foal from his haze. Rayo, exhausted, licked a few drops, his cracked tongue barely fluttering. The night passed slowly. As the hours deepened, the cold intensified, and desert wind swept through cactus thickets and dry stone. Jessica and Mark pitched a small tent about 20 meters away. They never took their eyes off Koda, the silent sentinel of the desert. "Koda's not sleeping," Mark murmured at 2 a.m. "He's still right next to Rayo. Not moving, not leaving," Jessica whispered back, eyes glued to her binoculars. "He's its last wall." And just as if written by a hand beyond human understanding, howls echoed from the distance, eerie, rising through the hills. 6 coyotes, maybe more. Mark sprang up. "Coyotes." Jessica nodded, gripping her trekking pole. "If they smell blood, nothing will stop them." But in that small valley, only one old wolf stood. Koda. He turned toward the howls, his hackles rising, eyes blazing in the darkness. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He just stood there, between the foal and the world. Alone. The night felt heavier, as the howls of the coyotes echoed through the canyon walls, mournful, resolute, like war horns blown across the Nevada wilderness. In that cold and silent valley, only 3 souls were fully awake. Rayo, gasping for air. Jessica, gripping her trekking pole in tension. And Koda, still and silent like a monument of shadow, standing firm in front of the foal. Mark whispered, voice trembling, "They're getting closer. At least 6. Jessica didn't take her eyes off Koda and replied under her breath, "One old wolf, against a whole pack of coyotes. It's not fair." On the opposite ridge, pairs of glowing eyes began to emerge. Those ghostly reflections in the moonlight, belonging to the hunters of the dark. They stood above, sniffing the scent of blood and exhaustion rising from Rayo's broken body. Koda did not flinch. He lowered his stance, bared his teeth, and let out a deep, rumbling growl, a sound so low it seemed to freeze the air. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. "This is the line. Do not cross it." Jessica tightened her grip on the pole and rose to her feet. "We have to help." Mark stopped her. "Jess, he's still a wolf. If we interfere, he could turn." But she was already stepping forward. Not running, not yelling, just striking her trekking pole rhythmically against the stone. Each beat a declaration of humanity confronting the wild. The coyotes hesitated. One hissed. Another stepped back. And then, like a ripple folding in reverse, the entire pack turned and vanished into the night. Koda didn't chase them. He turned, cast a look at Jessica, as if to say thank you. Then he returned to lie beside Rayo. Resuming his post, the silent guardian, Mark dropped down to the ground, forehead slick with sweat. "Dear God, I've never seen anything like that." Jessica whispered, "Koda's not an ordinary wolf. He's something science hasn't named yet." When dawn finally broke, a veterinary rescue helicopter touched down in the valley. The medical team arrived with gear, medicine, and hope. But they hadn't expected this. That the one who kept Rayo alive through the night was the very creature meant to end him. Koda watched them. No growl, no retreat, only a silent step back, yielding space to the newcomers. As if to say, "Now, it's your turn." The first light of day bathed the Nevada valley in gold, sketching out every line of a scene that seemed almost unreal. A frail wild foal, gasping for air on cold sand. And beside it, an old wolf, standing guard in silence like a hero pulled from legend. The veterinary helicopter landed half a mile away, its rotor winds kicking up a storm of dust that drowned out all sound. But Koda did not move. He had not slept all night, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Yet he remained at his post, a warrior who hadn't yet granted himself permission to rest. Jessica stepped out of the tent, a medical kit in her arms, her worried gaze locked on Rayo. As the veterinary team approached, Koda slowly rose to his feet. The noise of machines, voices, the scent of antiseptic, all signals from a world Koda did not belong to. But instead of growling or fleeing, he stepped back 3 paces, his eyes shifting from Rayo to Jessica. A quiet moment passed, like a sacred rite between nature and humankind. Koda was handing over the guardianship. Jessica gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Koda. We'll take it from here." Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the team lead, knelt beside Rayo, her hands quickly assessing pulse and breathing. Hypothermia, severe dehydration, acute renal failure, but miraculously, he's still responsive. She glanced at Jessica with skepticism. "You're telling me that wolf kept this foal alive?" Jessica didn't respond with words. Instead, she opened her handheld camera and played back the footage from the night before. Koda licking Rayo's lips, carrying water, sip by sip, fending off coyotes, keeping watch until dawn. Dr. Rodriguez froze. "That's impossible. Wolves don't do this. They never have," Jessica replied, her voice even. Then this time, nature rewrote its own rules. From the ridge above, Koda stood watching. The machines, the lights, the chemicals. This was a world that did not belong to him. But he didn't leave. He stood there, like a father handing his child to the surgeon, and waiting silently outside the operating room. Dr. Rodriguez checked her watch. "We have about 2 hours to save this foal. If he makes it, it'll be because of a being I, a lifelong student of biology, have no words to explain." Koda sat in silence. Rayo was being treated. The handover was complete, but the responsibility remained. After the medical equipment was stabilized and Rayo began receiving fluids, Jessica stepped away from the treatment area. Across the clearing, Koda still stood on the ridge, the solitary figure of an old warrior watching over the battlefield he had just walked away from. She approached him slowly, hands relaxed at her sides. Her expression softened. "Koda," she called gently. The old wolf turned to look at her, his eyes clouded with age but still burning with something primal. Trust. Koda did not fear humans, but he did not belong to them. And then, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, he turned and began to walk away, each step leaving a print in the sand like ancient symbols etched into time. No hurry, no caution, just the quiet closure of a mission, and the passing of the next chapter to human hands. Jessica watched him until he disappeared into the wilderness of scattered rocks. He walked away like he knew his purpose was complete. She said to Mark, who had just joined her. Mark stared after the wolf, thoughtful. "Do you think Koda really understood all of this?" Jessica didn't answer right away. She simply shook her head, tears silently falling down her cheeks. "He didn't need to understand like we do. He felt it, and that's enough." Back at the treatment station, Rayo's vitals began to improve, slowly but steadily. His pulse was stabilizing, body temperature returning to survival range. Beneath layers of warming blankets, Rayo shifted slightly. As if for the first time in days, he felt safe. As twilight faded, the medical team prepared to transport Rayo to a recovery center nearly 100 kilometers away. Dr. Rodriguez asked, "Jessica, are you coming with us?" Jessica looked once more toward where Koda had vanished, then turned back and nodded. "No, I've got something else to do." At the edge of the desert, wind swept fine sand across the ground, erasing the last of the footprints. But in one woman's heart, and in the blood of a young Mustang, Koda's presence would never fade. The next morning, after the medical helicopter had transported Rayo to the recovery center in Carson City, Jessica did not go with them. Instead, she returned to where Koda had vanished, the fading silhouette of gray at the edge of the desert. Something deep within her urged her back, not to claim him, not to interfere, but to honor him. A few old paw prints still lingered in the sand, gradually swept away by the night wind. Jessica slung on her backpack water, a GPS unit, and a cloth that still held the scent of where Koda had lain beside Rayo the night before. A quiet signal. She hoped Koda would recognize it. She called softly into the rocks. "Koda, it's me, Jessica?" No answer. Only wind whispering through the canyon walls and the scent of wild sagebrush. And then, a soft exhale. Distant, unclear, a faint whimper. Jessica slipped between the boulders, crouching low. And then, she saw him. The old wolf lay on his side, fur soiled with dust, chest rising and falling with labored breaths. His eyes were half closed, but his ears twitched lightly at the sound of her voice. No retreat, no fear, only trust and exhaustion. Jessica knelt, keeping her distance. "Koda," she whispered, "you're not a lone warrior anymore." She placed the cloth a few steps from his body, then reached for her radio. "Dr. Rodriguez? It's me. I need another rescue team. But this time, it's for an old wolf." Hours later, the team arrived, this time with leather gloves, a low-dose tranquilizer, and quiet reverence. Koda didn't resist. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, his golden eyes quietly met Jessica's. No fear, no resentment, only a silent message. "I trust you." Jessica watched the helicopter rise into the morning sky, her heart full. She knew, if Rayo was a symbol of life renewed, then Koda was the ancient soul of the wild. Tired, untamed, but still capable of love. 3 weeks later, Rayo, the wild foal once stranded on the edge of death, had made a miraculous recovery. His body was strong again, his eyes bright and alert, sharper than ever. Every morning, he galloped around the training paddock, pulsing with renewed life. But there was something in the way he paused, a distant look in his eyes, as if searching for something he had lost. In a different enclosure, Koda was recovering too. Under the soft light of morning, the old wolf's thin frame had begun to fill out again. The wound on his leg was healing, aided by medicine and careful care. Though no longer a hunter, Koda's golden eyes remained sharp, and every time the sound of hooves echoed from across the yard, he would rise, quietly step out of the shade, and look, a gaze across space. No call, no bark, no whinny, but enough for two souls to recognize one another. Jessica was the first to notice. "Koda doesn't want to integrate with the other wolves," she told Dr. Rodriguez. "He's not part of them anymore. He's not a predator. He's not a leader. He's just looking for Rayo." Rodriguez nodded, eyes distant in thought. "So you believe two beings, once predator and prey, can live side by side?" Jessica smiled. "We already saw it, out in the desert, in the dark, to test a new kind of interaction model." Jessica proposed building a special habitat. 2 semi-wild enclosures side by side, separated by a thick, shatter-proof glass wall, allowing observation without danger. No one could say for certain what would happen, but everyone agreed. The most unbelievable thing had already happened out there. Now it was time to learn how to believe. On the first day, Rayo was released into the new space. He ran a loop, then stopped, frozen. Koda was already there, standing still, pressed against the glass. Rayo approached, slow steps, no fear. Koda didn't move, he simply waited. When only a meter remained between them, they stood, still, silent. Then, Rayo lowered his head, Koda closed his eyes, and in that quiet moment, they found each other again. From that day on, every evening, people witnessed the same quiet scene. An old wolf sitting silently, watching a young horse graze on the other side of the glass. Not dependency, not friendship as humans define it, but respect. A silent pact between two souls who had walked the edge of death and chose to remain. Since the special observation zone between Koda and Rayo was established, the staff at the rescue center noticed something unusual. Visitors began arriving more and more, not to watch tricks or staged performances, but simply to sit in silence, observing an old wolf and a young horse standing beside each other through a wall of glass. A boy who had withdrawn from the world after losing his father began to cry as he watched Koda lying quietly beside Rayo's sleeping form. "It's like Dad watching over me," he whispered to his mother. An elderly woman, a former wartime nurse, trembled as she touched the glass. "I saw this in the trenches," she whispered. Not in a zoo. A video showing Koda bringing water to Rayo, and then lying beside him through the glass as Rayo drifted to sleep, was posted on social media. Within 48 hours, it surpassed 10 million views. The headline that went viral across the world: Koda and Rayo. When instinct yields to compassion. Journalists came. So did scientists. During the live broadcast interview, a reporter asked Jessica, "Do you think this is a miracle?" Jessica simply smiled, her gaze resting on the glass wall. "No, it's a higher instinct. The instinct to choose kindness. When there's no more threat. When the loneliness runs too deep. And empathy becomes too real." Koda became a symbol. Not just a wolf, but living proof that survival doesn't always require violence. That even in the heart of a former predator, there is still choice. International animal welfare organizations offered grants to expand the sanctuary. A European wildlife documentary producer reached out, proposing a full-length series on Rayo and Koda. The small placard outside the enclosure, once marked only with Latin species names, was replaced. Rayo, the one who was saved. Koda, the one who chose to save. This was now a place where two souls had transcended instinct, to live gently alongside one another. But darkness never disappears completely. The story grew so famous that it caught the attention of an illegal wildlife trafficking group. They began investigating the sanctuary layout, its security systems, and planning a heist. What they didn't know was that once again, Koda, though aged and worn, would rise and stand his ground. That night, Nevada turned cold with wind. The moon vanished behind gray clouds, and the sanctuary sank into an eerie stillness. No howling wind, no owls calling, only soft amber lights casting shadows across the enclosures and observation zones. Inside the monitoring room, a night shift staffer named Jordan was sipping coffee when a beep broke the silence. A motion sensor in the northern quadrant, an area closed to the public, had detected movement. 2:17 a.m. A black, unmarked truck sat 200 meters from the outer fence. Two figures in black clothing, gloved hands, and headlamps were cutting through the western fence with wire cutters. They were bounty hunters, hired to capture Rayo, the wild horse that had become a global symbol. On the black market, animals like Rayo weren't just biologically rare. They were valuable because of fame. What they didn't know was that Koda, the wolf they assumed had faded into the background, was still watching. 2:22 a.m. Rayo, asleep in the semi-open paddock, suddenly jerked awake. Ears upright, eyes flaring with alertness. He heard the metallic snip of cutters, the crunch of boots on sand. And then, Koda growled. No one expected a 12-year-old wolf, with broken teeth and scars of starvation, to move like that. But Koda didn't growl out of fear. He growled from memory, from the lonely nights, from the moment he saw Rayo collapse in the desert, and chose to save instead of strike. Now, he no longer had the strength to hunt, but he still had the instinct to protect. 2:24 a.m. The intruders had been inside the fence for less than 5 minutes. When a gray streak shot out from the bushes, Koda didn't bark. He didn't howl. He lunged like an arrow, clamping onto the wrist of the man holding the tranquilizer gun. The man screamed, the weapon flying from his hand. The second intruder raised a syringe, but was knocked flat by Rayo, who had burst from his stall at the sound of Koda's growl. 2:26 a.m. The main alarm system activated. Floodlights lit the compound. Security staff and police arrived within 4 minutes. But what they found stunned them. One intruder unconscious, arm clearly broken, the other tied up with a shredded horsepen rope, which Jessica would later discover Koda had dragged out and gnawed partially, as if to defend the space. Rayo stood beside Koda, licking a wound on his neck. And Koda, lying there, breath ragged, blood trickling from his leg, eyes still open, not afraid. Jessica arrived first, dropping to her knees beside him, eyes filling with tears. You saved him again, one more time? Dr. Rodriguez performed a quick exam. It's not deep, but he needs treatment now. Rayo, never taking his eyes off Koda, followed the stretcher closely, hooves tapping gently on concrete, like he was seeing off a loved one. Into one final battle. Dawn painted the Nevada sky in shades of rosé. But no one at the Wild Crossroads Sanctuary was sleeping. Koda, the old wolf who had done the impossible, was lying in the ICU of the veterinary center. The heart monitor pulsed in slow, steady rhythm, then suddenly slowed again. Rayo stood outside the glass wall, his mane catching the soft morning breeze. He did not whinny. He did not panic. He simply stood there, his eyes calm, as if he understood that something permanent was drawing near. 7:21 a.m. Jessica entered the room, gently took Koda's scarred front paw. "You've done it, Koda. You kept your final promise?" Dr. Rodriguez, wiping her tears, whispered, "In 25 years of veterinary medicine, this is the first time I've seen a predator live." Because of love, Koda turned his head slightly. His clouded amber eyes still held one last flicker of light. He looked at Rayo one final time. And then, he closed his eyes. His heart stopped, not in the solitude of the unforgiving wild, but in the presence of the humans he once feared. And beside the creature he chose to protect with everything he had left. 1 week later, the story circled the globe. The press called Koda the saint of the wild. Outlets like National Geographic, BBC Earth, and the New York Times ran front-page headlines. When the wolf did not hunt, but chose to save a horse. Over 70 million people watched the video of Rayo gently resting his head against Koda's in front of the ICU door. As a final farewell, tears fell onto silver fur, amid the sound of Nevada's wind sweeping through. 1 month later, a memorial was built on the southern hill of the sanctuary. A simple stone marker reads, "Koda, 2012 to 2024. You chose compassion in a world ruled by instinct. And because of that, humanity bowed its head. Beneath it, a cement impression of Rayo's hoof is embedded. A permanent gesture of gratitude." At the expanded open range, amid the spring grasses, Rayo was now fully grown, powerful, resilient, but every sunset, he returned to the hill, where Koda once lay to watch over him. Not to call out, just to remember, "I miss you, and I will carry on." In her final interview, Jessica said, "Maybe Koda saw something. It takes us centuries to understand. That all life, wolf or horse, human or wild, longs for one thing, to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved, before it's too late." If you've made it this far, you've walked with us through the extraordinary journey of an old wolf and a wild horse. A story not just about survival, but about choice, between instinct and compassion. If you've ever made a promise to someone, no matter how long ago, no matter how impossible it seems now, remember this: a promise kept can change an entire soul. And some lessons don't need words, only a look, just like Koda taught us. Share this story if you believe that love can rise above instinct. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story that speaks straight to the heart. Koda and Rayo aren't just legends. They're proof that even in the wild, compassion still has a place to live.